Today we have two iPhone XRs in for repair. One of them has a dead battery and one of them I'll be using as a donor device. So I'll be spending a total of $0 on this project, and I'll just be trying to make do with just these two phones and the parts they have inside of them. So let's just get started. The first thing that we have to do now is to unscrew those two little P2 pencil-lip screws at the bottom of the phone. Now unfortunately on the Coral iPhone, one of the screws is actually stripped, so we'll only be able to take off one of the screws here. The next step now is just to use a heat gun or a hairdryer to soften up some of that adhesive so we can pry into that screen a little bit easier. Now with that done, we should just be able to use a suction cup just to lift up the screen a bit and a pick just to cut through all that glue holding the screen in place. Now with the phone finally opened up, it's pretty clear to see that this phone has been worked on before. The screen came off pretty easily, and that just means that the adhesive really wasn't that strong. And also, especially since that strip screw at the bottom didn't really give us any problems. Since this phone has already been diagnosed with a dead battery, we won't really need to worry about that screen, and we can just remove that shield covering the battery connector with a small tri-wing screwdriver. And with that shield removed, we can now just disconnect that battery and also take it out. Now this phone, I can already tell, doesn't have the original battery adhesive, so I'm just gonna take it out with my fingernail. But please do not do this with the original adhesive because it's not gonna come out. With all of our screws and parts organized, we can now move over to this blue iPhone. Just repeating exactly what we did on the Coral iPhone by unscrewing those two little screws at the bottom, we find that unfortunately this phone also has strip screws, but instead it's on both of the screws here. You can see me looking a little bit confused while I try to figure that out. After finally realizing what was going on, I decided to just continue on with heating up the display just as we did with the Coral iPhone. Now with the blue phone finally open, we can also tell that this phone has been worked on before, although the adhesive did give me much more, or quite a bit more trouble compared to the Coral iPhone, and also those strip screws again did not really affect me there. Immediately after, we can see that there's also no more shields in the way blocking that battery connector or the screen connectors at all, so I'll just be disconnecting that right away, and you can also see me prying out that battery with just my fingers just because there's no adhesive again. Now with both iPhones open up right next to each other, you can actually see that the iPhone XR that's Coral has a MagSafe mod on it, but it looks kind of messy. Either way though, we should just be able to transfer that battery from the blue phone over, and it should be working as intended. Now with the battery in, we should just be able to plug it in just to test out to make sure that the battery completely works for this Coral iPhone. We can see that the low battery icon shows up, and that's already a good sign, which means that the battery is actually charging and it's working. So for now, we'll just set this Coral iPhone to the side while we try to patch that blue iPhone back up. Jumping back to that Coral iPhone, after testing and confirming that it boots and works under that new battery, we can now just screw that shield back on with those three little tri-wing screws. With that finished, we should just be able to start off by prepping the phone for the new adhesive. So we can just go around the phone's edges with some tweezers or a spudger just to get off all that old glue. Because what was used on this phone before is not the original display adhesive, it took a bit more scraping off just because it's just some black glue. But now that we have it all off, we should be able to just apply the better adhesive designed for screens. And because we didn't remove those little flex cables for the screen, we can just start by doing the top right corner, just so that we don't really have to interfere with the display cables over there. Here you can see me struggle a bit with getting my phone back onto the roof because, using painter's tape to stick a phone to the ceiling is definitely a really great idea. Anyways, back to what we were doing. So for the rest of the adhesive, I just decided to cut off a corner of that little plastic, again just to avoid those flex cables that lead to the screen. And it kind of just makes removing that little plastic cover just a bit easier. Now sometimes this adhesive can become a real pain, so you can see me just kind of struggle with it a little bit and just trying to just keep it stuck to the actual frame instead of the plastic, the little blue plastic that comes with it. And so you can see me just use some tweezers to press down on that adhesive part so that the plastic doesn't come off with it. And with the phone all closed off, we can just test the screen for all of its original functionality, make sure that there's no dead spots on the digitizer, and just make sure that everything fully works. Now for the final finishing touches of this bright coral iPhone XR, we can just screw back that lonely, unfortunate P2 pencil lobe screw there. And even though it doesn't really do anything for the phone, it just kind of completes the whole look. Alright, and now we are on the home stretch, so we can just put that coral iPhone over onto the side just to sit for a bit while we just kind of patch up and finish up what we need to do for this blue iPhone XR to start working. Now when I removed the battery off of the coral iPhone XR, I actually noticed that the battery looked pretty fine, and what might have been causing the issue was actually the connection being kind of loose or being a little bit sideways. So I'm just going to retry by putting this battery back in and seeing if it works with this blue iPhone instead. Now for the moment of truth of just testing out the phone, we can see that the phone does work with this battery. You can see that it is receiving power just because it doesn't show that little charging icon at the bottom. And hopefully it retains a charge. So we'll just let that boot up for a little bit. While we're just waiting for that to boot up, we can actually just bring back the coral iPhone XR and use a heat gun just to soften that adhesive. And then after that adhesive is all nice and soft, we can put it inside of a press just to make sure that the screen stays adhered and stays just kind of watertight. Alright, and I'm back after letting them charge for just a couple of minutes, and you can see that both of them do turn on and show up onto their lock screens with no issues with touch or anything like that. Alright, and now with all of that done, we now have two completely working iPhone XRs, and honestly this repair wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, especially since we could kind of fix everything using just exactly what we already had, and either way the battery wasn't fully broken, it was just not seated correctly, and now that we just did a quick battery swap, both of them work just fine.